Hey guys, Sunday evening, and this is the fastest I've ever. Forgive my appearance. You want somebody who's slick with no substance, or do you want me talking, with my 8-hour videos? Um, I just decided to do this about 5 minutes ago. I have never done less preparation for a video. I was thinking about the subject matter. Wow, I'm a mess. Hey, it's Sunday. I actually had off today. I should have done this earlier, but I was doing laundry over my sister's house, and had to come home, make the bed, put the clothes away. Got to go to work tomorrow morning. The last couple nights, though, I've been thinking about a subject matter video where I have a question for anybody who's willing to answer, whether it's simply in comments or when you make your own videos, if you make mention of it. I had done this one when I first started doing videos, asking how many people still had the old-fashioned can-like headphones and, seriously put them on and listen to music anymore, to what extent that was done. Yeah, I really no preparation, practically none. 5 minutes of pulling records off the shelf. I want to get a set up like Colin has, and where you can actually hear the music, I had this idea for a video, and my main reason for doing it is probably to see if other people have this experience. I have albums of mine, and it's not necessarily favorite albums, though it's more likely to happen with favorite albums. And that is, I'm wondering if anybody has specific albums that you have that whenever you pull them off the shelf again, things that you've had for a long time, that when you pull off the shelf, inevitably, it triggers very specific memories, and the same like memories every time, and you can't suppress them no matter how hard you try. And it's weird because I have favorite albums over the years that might not necessarily be the case. For whatever reason, I've listened to them for many years. Maybe I can remember when I bought them in the store, but the music is just there, and I listen to it, and I'm aware of the fact that, I was listening to this album 30 plus years ago. And then others, I have very, very specific memories. Sometimes all I have to do is look at the album cover, but certainly every time the music starts playing, these memories come. And I just pulled. I had a couple albums I specifically wanted to show because they're very strong with associations. But I could do this with a lot, not most of my albums, but I could do this with a whole bunch of albums, and I might, if anybody's interested, do another video in the future about, something similar with other albums. I just grabbed a few. Not going chronologically, but really, the first one, which is something that I still listen to. I guess I have to put that in there because I could go back to my rock and roll years of, listening to that stuff in high school. And, if I were to play one of those records, I would have specific memories. But, I don't really listen to those very much anymore. But things that I still do play on a regular basis. First one is my Klaus Schulze Time Wind vinyl. This was the first album by Klaus Schulze that I bought, and in many ways, still, one of my top two favorites of his. And the memory that's associated with it, which is why I'm showing this, and that landscape, does that explain the music or not, the album cover? I bought this knowing nothing about Klaus Schulze. Nobody recommended it to me. Unlike the internet, when you can sample anything to get an idea what it's about, I had not heard a note. I didn't know anybody. I think maybe a clerk at the record store knew something about him, but didn't even convey any information to me. It just looked interesting. I was interested in the concept of one man playing all of the instruments, just him, no other musicians, in the studio, which is still to this day a favorite setting of mine. And I bought it knowing it was all instrumental, all done by one guy, all synthesizers. This was 1970, I think 77, probably early 78 that I bought this in the import section, Sam Goody store. And the memory I have associated with it, which is really what this video is about, is I remember bringing it home, amazed at the fact that, one side is 30 minutes and the other side is 28 something, almost 29 minutes. And I remember my bedroom at the time. And it's only because of this album that I can remember the specific layout of my bedroom. I had a twin-sized bed, the head of which, where the pillows were. Right in front of the head, I had about less than 2 feet of space before the wall of the bedroom. In that 2 feet of space, I had put between the headboard of the bed and the wall, I had put my stereo receiver and my turntable on top of it. So when I was laying down, the stereo receiver is like right here, the light shining in my face. But it made it very easy because I could take a vinyl record and just stretch my arms out, put a vinyl record right there, right on the stereo without even getting up out of bed. And I remember putting on, this album, turning the lights down or out completely, and having the glow of the stereo receiver there, and just putting the needle down and listening to this music for a half hour, flipping the side over, listening to the rest of it for another half hour, and I think I repeated it after that. I have that memory every time I pull this out and I play this in any form, MP3 in my computer or anything. I remember that night of discovering this and listening to this whole thing and it being, wow, this is almost exactly what I expected it to be. But I had never experienced any music like that before, really. I knew nothing about the Berlin school, the Berlin musicians, Klaus Schulze, Tangerine Dream, nothing. This is my first foray into that kind of world. And every time I hear Time Wind, I picture that night in that little room, with the stereo receiver shining in my face, the turntable on top of it, and putting this thing on and just letting it go for a half hour. Here's another one that's strong with memories. I remember buying this in the store, Eberhard Weber. I had a handful of ECM releases when this came out. This was a new release, and the cover looks good, but I bet you from so many plays, the vinyl is I'm sure it's crap, because this album got a lot of plays. I had a handful of ECMs. When was this? So this came out in '80, probably more than a handful. But this was my first Eberhard Weber. I don't even think I had him as a sideman on anything prior to this. But, I was a couple years into the ECM thing, sampling all their artists. And, it looked interesting, having it. Obviously, it wasn't a straight jazz band. You had bass and drums, keyboard player that played synthesizer, in with Charlie Mariano's saxophone. I really knew none of the musicians at this time, individually. But oddly enough, I remember buying this in the store. I remember looking at it a couple times before I picked it up. I don't know how I made this my first Eberhard Weber purchase, except for the fact that maybe I was looking for something. Well, it was a new release, and at that time I was tend to gravitate toward the newer albums, and if I liked it, pick up the back catalog. Maybe I was just looking for something a little more conventional. You had the drums and the bass there, the keyboards. Since it didn't have guitar, maybe I was not necessarily looking for like a bass solo album at that point yet. But the strange thing with this is I've loved this one, and I've gotten so many plays over the years that my memory of this, oddly enough, is not so much when I first played it or when I remember buying it in the store, but years later, 5, 6, 7 years later, I was still listening to this album a lot. And like pretty much all of my favorite albums, I had recorded a cassette copy off the vinyl and kept it in my car. And I can remember, and I don't know why I remember this because it's a non-story. I just remember driving around my town, just my neighborhood, and I had the cassette of this in and just listening to this album over and over again. But specifically, I just remember driving in my town, and I might have been coming home from work or driving to work. I was probably, more than likely, I think it was probably a weekend. I was probably just driving to a local pizzeria to pick up pizza to bring home to eat. Something as simple as that. But I remember being in the car. I had this for years. But every time I put this album on, I remember that driving around listening to a cassette of this that I had made for my vinyl. And just doing my daily chores, and nothing exciting. I didn't see a car accident. I didn't nothing. It was just my old neighborhood that I lived in for over 50 years. And yet every time I listen to this album, I think of that. I notice now the microphone is really far away, and I'm wondering if this is getting picked up. Hold on, it'll probably be noisy. So I don't know if the sound was even coming out before because the microphone was quite far away. Another one I picked up without, and this is my first Egberto Gismonti album that I heard. I actually read a review in, there was a magazine called Record Review Magazine that was around in the late 70s, which was a really good magazine, a print magazine. I was familiar with ECM already, and I hadn't heard any Egberto music. And again, this is an all-solo album, and it was a new release. So, this was an easy one for me to pick up. But oddly enough, the memory I have connected with this, I had a horrible job at the time. I was working as a baker in Dunkin' Donuts, which I did for a few months. A night job, overnight. Horrible job. I pretty much list that until my current job is the worst job I ever had. It was at that time that I had read in Record Review Magazine about this album. And it made me go out and buy it. And oddly, then I was listening to it when I first obtained it, and I was listening to it a lot. It was when I had that night job and when I was, working as a baker, all by myself at night there. There's no assistant baker or anything like that. You'd work there, you go in at 9, 10, 11 at night and work until just about dawn. Horrible, horrible job. But I was listening to this album at that time, and sadly, you don't get to choose what memories are associated with albums. But every time I put this music on, I recall that job and that time period. That's the way it is. A strong association. I think I told this story before. This is not my first album with Jack DeJohnette on it, but one of the first solo albums of his I bought, and my favorite album, probably still to this day, which is half of it's just solo Jack overdubbed, and the other half of it is duets with John Abercrombie on guitars. Recorded February 1976, so it's an early ECM album. And again, my recollection of this isn't so much picking it up in the store when I first got home to play it, but my association is, and I think I told this story before, again, I had made a cassette copy of this to play in the car, and one night I was going out. I think I was meeting somebody, maybe to go into a local bar that had live music performances, and I was in a parking lot waiting to meet a friend in the parking lot before we went into this club or bar. It's a bar with live performances, I think, I had this album. It was freezing winter. I don't know if it was January or February, but it was cold, cold, cold. And I had this on cassette. And my friend was always late. I'm always early, and my friend that I was meeting was always late. And wherever we were going, I wasn't going to walk in by myself. I was going to hang out and meet my friend out in the parking lot. And just waiting, I had this album, the cassette copy I made of this album playing. And again, every single time that I play, pictures, every time I listen to this, I think of sitting in that car, dark. It was wintertime, so it got dark early. And it was probably, already 9 o'clock at night or so. Dark as anything, cold as anything, but listening to this particular album, sitting in that lot. And I can remember where the parking lot is. I could still go there to this day and point out, that's the lot I was sitting there listening to Jack DeJohnette's pictures. Yeah, maybe I'll save that one for next time. I'm going to keep this under 8 hours. Here's another one. I remember buying this, picking this one up. One of the first, if not the first, John Abercrombie albums I ever picked up. I think it was the first time I heard Dave Holland. And one of the first times I heard Jack DeJohnette, not the first time, but one of the first times, Gateway 2. Which John Abercrombie kind of dismissed this album. This is my favorite Gateway album to this day, even with the ones that they made, afterwards in the 90s. I love this. I love this album. And I listened to this one a lot. And, essentially you could say it's guitar-based drums, but a kind of unique take on that. And one track, which was written by DeJohnette, which is probably my favorite composition of his, called Blue. DeJohnette plays piano, didn't overdub any drums on it. So it's just piano, upright bass, and guitar. Beautiful. One of the most beautiful things DeJohnette ever did. Actually, my 3 favorite pieces are Blue from this album, which was composed by Jack DeJohnette, and 2 of the pieces from the Pictures album. So it's, a lot of my favorite DJNet compositions basically come from the same time period and the same album. This was 77, and July 77 this was recorded in, whereas the Pictures album by Jack DeJohnette was February 76. And this period was something special. But on this particular album, again, I had made a cassette copy of it, and I was really digging it. There was I guess, some aspects to it I didn't quite understand, in a good way, that made me listen to it and really say, gee, I wonder why they're playing it this way. And so I drove around with a cassette copy. And I remember the job I had at the time. It was really my first full-time job after high school. And I was working in an office building, probably the worst job, the lowest position in the office building. But it was a full-time job. And again, I had this on tape. And driving back and forth to work, I would listen to this album incessantly. And every time I played, I remember that job. It was late 70s. I worked there from about 70, probably late 78, into 79, probably just getting into 80. I worked at that job, and I was heavily, heavily listening to this album then. And I can't, even the album cover makes me think of that time and that period and that listening to it on cassette. I'm going with only one more, because if I do this as a series, maybe I'll do a half a dozen albums each time or whatever. And this one, which is playing in the background, Carla Bley's Nightglow, my favorite album of hers. A lot of people have dismissed this as her smooth jazz album or her easy listening album. And yes, it's easier, perhaps less complex, certainly less avant-garde than her other albums. I gotta admit, she's a great musician, but I really have a lot of problems getting into a lot of her stuff. It's just very dense. And I don't know, if you listen to smooth jazz, this doesn't fit that radio. This would never get played on any smooth jazz station unless they were very, very open. Maybe an internet radio station, but not the kind of terrestrial radio stations that played smooth jazz back in the day. It's easier to get into. I love this album. I've never stopped listening to this album. I've long had it on CD as well. I like this album immediately. It's basically a 6-piece band, but there's these wonderful background horn charts on the album, all written out. And I had it for years, and I don't know if I just forgot it or it escaped my memory, because I always read the musicians on the album. But two of the guys that are doing, there's a 5-piece horn section which does these wonderful backgrounds, which sometimes actually sound 1960s-ish. If you've heard 1960s music, the way it was, tightly arranged. Some of the horn charts are just the most incredible, beautiful, subtle things. You probably wouldn't even notice them unless you're really tuned in. But of the 5 musicians who are just doing these background horn parts, obviously reading charts, not soloing, is John Clark, who had his own ECM album at one time on French horn, Randy Brecker, the trumpet player, probably everybody knows who he is, and no less than Paul McCandless on oboe, English horn, soprano, tenor, and baritone saxophones. He plays a lot of horns on the background. Paul McCandless from the Oregon band. And this is another album. I had made a cassette copy of it and listened to it a whole lot. And this is pretty much when I first got it. And one of the oddball memories that I have, and every time I play the album, every time I even look at it or think of it, was I've been a vegetarian for a lot of years, but I used to actually go to McDonald's sometimes on a Saturday, sometimes even a Sunday, and go to the drive-thru. And this is when the drive-thrus just started around here in the probably very late 70s or very early 80s, probably early 80s. And I would get a soft drink, and I would get French fries, a big, whatever the largest size French fries they would have. And I would actually sit in my car in the parking lot, and I would just eat the French fries, sitting in my car, with my soft drink. I'd just sit there and eat the French fries, and whatever cassettes I had with me, because by then, at that point I wasn't listening to a whole lot of live radio, and I remember playing this album on the, from the cassette that I had made from the vinyl, and sitting in a McDonald's parking lot, eating French fries on this, pretty sure it was a Saturday afternoon, with my soft drink, and just listening to this album, slowly eating the French fries. When they were done, I just drove home. It's one of those oddball things that I always recall. I could take you back to that spot. I could even show you where I parked my car. Within one space, I would be correct. The third or fourth parking space in there. And it's weird how if I didn't have this album playing then, I wouldn't remember that because it's hardly an event, So, I'm wondering, as far as the thread goes, if anybody has... I know Jeff does, because Jeff's got an incredible memory. Vinyl Spin Jeff. But I'm wondering if any other folks have this thing where, certain albums that you pull out to listen to, or once you hear the music itself, it triggers that same memory time and time and time again, and you couldn't erase it even if you wanted to. So I thought, I've been thinking about that for a few days as a thread, as a potential question for people. And I'm sure that people in the VC have that association, whereas a lot of people probably don't, that are less intense with their enjoyment of music. Just thought I would throw it out there on a Sunday night when it's late for me to be doing a video when I have to go to work tomorrow. But I thought I would just throw this out, keep it under 8 hours. Okay, guys, that's it. Anybody that wants to respond, anybody that thinks it's even a worthy enough subject to make a mention sometime when they make a video of, their associations, if they have them, would be great. Sunday night right now. Hope everybody has a great week. And, I might be back at the very end of the week. I should have like a Friday off, I think. Okay, guys, that's it. I'll be back soon. Take care.